Hey guys, welcome to Real Job Optional Freedom. Real estate can be complicated. Let an investor guide you. We are here to demystify the complex nature of real estate by getting you answers from professionals who are in the trenches so you can be the hero to your real freedom story. Welcome to Real Money, a weekly segment of Real Freedom Podcast, where we ask the most pressing real estate questions. With me today, my co-host Kevin Gilbert, and I'm Chris Bell. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about the rental relief funds that we've been seeing and kind of what we've been seeing going on in that side of the rental market. We're also going to talk a little bit about what higher interest rates are doing and how we view that on the investment side. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the administrative side of real estate investing and how important that is. And so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start today talking about rent relief and what we're seeing. And Kevin, I was sharing a story with you how our offices had received roughly about $30,000 in rent relief checks. One of those checks, as it was coming in, we knew in advance because one of the property managers had been in communication with the rent relief office. Don't cash that check because they put a stop payment on it because it had been months and the check had not shown up. So the property manager, of course, said, hey, like you're saying you sent it. We've never seen it. Don't put a stop payment on it. Let me give you the ACH information. Maybe we'll get the funds faster so we can pay the owners. And lo and behold, checks show up months after rent relief have said that they've been mailed. And so we knew, we set that check aside. We took the other roughly $20,000. We deposit those checks and, roughly 3 to 4 days later, the bank is contacting us and saying, hey, those big checks you deposited from the rent relief folks, they're NSF. And the reason why, bank says, they've had stop payments put on them. And lo and behold, touch base property manager, and property manager says, yeah, those checks were written from rent relief months ago and they never showed up. So they put stop payments on them. And now we're waiting for ACH money to come in to basically replace these NSF checks. And we haven't seen the ACH money yet. Needless to say, it's one of those things like it's in the mail. And, I hope, I pray, fingers crossed, that the funds show up like they're supposed to. But it has been a nightmare dealing with this stuff. We've got landlords in multiple markets that have been well over a year of tenants not paying rent for whatever the reason may be. And it's bad. It's really bad. And, some of these landlords, they've been able to defer their mortgage payments. Other ones have not. So they're basically hanging on by the skin of their teeth on some of these things. And tenants just not paying and refuse to pay, still claiming something related to COVID and, job loss, what have you. So it's tough. I really feel for the landlords that are in that situation. And, here in one of the markets we're in, the eviction moratorium, it literally in the next 60 days-ish is going to be over. And these residents are going to be faced with pay up or get out. And the housing market right now is, at least the rental market, there's hardly any rental properties on the market. And if there are rental properties on the market, the rent is significantly higher than it was just 9 months ago, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars more expensive than the exact same property was just 6 to 9 months ago.
Yeah, so we're seeing a severe shortage, and we're seeing, you know, these particular cases, they're not going to pass the credit check now, right? You're going to be behind on your bills. It's going to be a problem for those individuals. But also, like, this is one of those situations where it's really, really tough, but also percentage wise, we're not talking about, half the occupants, right? This is not, this is a small minority, but for those people, if you're a landlord with one of those and you only have 1, 2, 3, 4 units, that's a big deal. That is excruciatingly painful. And I've read a lot since the pandemic started. And you got to remember, like, this is a big emergency push by the government to get money out there and get it into people's hands, and it's just been a train wreck. The government is not an organization that moves smoothly or quickly, no matter how hard they try. And it's been excruciatingly painful. You also have a large number of people with what I want to call the DMV mentality, of where, they're they're paid no matter what the performance is, and they're really just more worried about covering their own butt, right? And I have read about federal agencies pushing the money, and then they go to check on it 2, 3 months later, and they've handed out no money to anybody. And part of that was, before a pandemic started, there was organizations whose job was to make sure the government was not scammed. And they're like, this is a desperate situation. Get the money out there. We'll worry about, uh, criminals later. There's people who are in bad situations. So you read that and you understand it's a government organization. There's holdups, there's problems, there's bureaucracy. And if you're a landlord who's gone 2 years without payment, that doesn't really help help you in the checkbook, right? You're still making mortgage payments and still struggling not receiving those funds. I personally got one. I got somebody who's been there 2 years. Um, we've never received funds with them, and I believe they have one of these prepaid legal services. So basically, our staff are dealing with a lawyer, and I'm sure she's paying some fee to them, but she's not paying us. So dealing with the lawyer, we've gotten through this process twice now. So they had a check sent, and then now a year later, a second check is being sent. And this check was made out to the person on staff dealing with the process, not the company that owned the property. So she called up and said, "Hey, you made it out to the wrong person." And so they immediately canceled the check and told us they're sending another one. And recognizing the severe bureaucratic process that you got to go through for all that, I'm hoping that check shows up in the next 2 weeks and not a year from now. So we'll see how it goes. Keep you updated.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you see it. It's like the check finally came. You really get excited because you look at it and you're like, man, for like months, I feel like they've been lying to me. Like, how hard is it to take billions of dollars and say, hey, this person put in an application process for that. Like, this is the dollar amount. Okay, here's the check, here's the envelope, here's the stamp, out the door. But I guess things are harder than they seem. But to your point, Kevin, it is these are not big numbers that we're dealing with. So I kind of look at this as it's like this mini black swan event where you've got the government saying, hey, you can't evict people for basically over a year, 2 years, some scenarios here. But there's still not a large percentage of these folks that fall into that category. I'd have to say if we looked over our entire portfolio, multiple states, roughly 10% fall into that. And I think we have seen some of the checks start to come in, getting the landlords paid back. So that's definitely a good thing. One of the other things that we did just on the property management side is looking at different alternatives to try to safeguard against some of this stuff. And there's new insurance products that have been released literally in just the past maybe 2, maybe 3 years, that are like rent guarantee products. Um, and they will cover landlords in the event that the tenant
Wow.
doesn't pay. And, it's not indefinite. Like they won't pay forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, but even a 6 month policy or something can make a huge difference if you're in that 10%, right?
Yeah, so if you're in that small, small party, and you had some insurance to basically kind of fall back on, safety net, if you will, if you weren't able to, put your mortgage in forbearance because it wasn't a government-backed mortgage or something like that, it just gives you that extra layer of protection. So that's one of the things from a management company standpoint that we're helping educate our clients on, is just saying, hey, there are new instruments, there are new products that are in the market, that, they're minimal cost, some 30, 40, $50 a month, but if you only have one, two, three, four properties, like it's a drop in the bucket to pay for that extra protection, as opposed to, you get one or two of those properties not paying for an extended period of time. That could be a big cash flow crunch on you. So anyway, we're educating clients on some of the new products that are out there, and that's helping.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sinking funds. Basically the old school emergency fund, and you always hear the 3 to 6 months emergency fund. If you have a 6 month emergency fund, you're doing pretty good, and that's to cover short term problems, right? Well, a pandemic will have you reevaluate what does short term mean, right? When you look at a real estate, you're talking 10, 20 years from now, or whatever your retirement plans are. Uh, that's one thing. But when you're like, okay, I have enough money to cover if everything goes sideways for 6 months. And now you're talking, if I have one property that goes sideways for 2 years, start to reevaluate what does that mean and what is enough, sitting in your back pocket to cover that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's definitely got a lot of people reevaluating. But
Yeah, because one of the things with that is, you would look at a scenario like that and go, oh my gosh, I had to pay a mortgage for, I don't know, let's just say a year, 2 years, like worst case scenario, at least right now we're dealing with. Um, it doesn't mean that the real estate is a bad investment. It's like you say, it's short term, it's painful from a cash flow standpoint and whatnot, but it doesn't mean the real estate was a bad investment. Because, I mean, let's face it, if you own the real estate before this pandemic, even if you had to pay the mortgage, almost no matter where you live in the country, the appreciation rates have gone up 20 some odd percent. The houses are worth significantly more than they were. The rents now have gone up, 20, 30% in a lot of markets. So the rents, even though you're not collecting that rent right this second, when you are able to kind of turn that tide and collect those rents, your return on your investment is going to go through the roof just in the matter of a couple of years. So you're basically facing this painful time right now and trying to make sure you can weather that so you can get on the backside of it to capture all of those gains that are there to be taken.
yeah, that's an interesting view. You do hear, we're not talking about most people not paying. We uh, this usually goes pretty smoothly for a lot of clients, but we are seeing some craziness right now. But that's an interesting idea. I've talked to a number of people this past week, three separate family units, we'll call them, who are interested or involved in real estate. And let's think about that as an example, right? You're making this payment, and while it's painful, you know, if you do a comparison to, all right, 2 years ago I started buying $500 a month or $1,000 a month of stock, and then 2 years later, what does that stock look like? Where you take the same thing and be like, all right, I made mortgage payments for 2 years out of my own pocket, but I've also seen the appreciation, and I'm about to jack up the rent. Um, yeah, the man, it's hard to beat this stuff long term, especially when you're looking into the details. Your cash on cash is often scary to people. I was actually talking to a young lady I say young, but that's old people talk. She was probably, around 30 and a week from having a baby. And her husband really was really excited about real estate, but she's fearful of it, right? And you miss out on these opportunities because of that. Um, and this stuff can go sideways. It can cause some sleepless nights, but man, long term, it's so strong in your favor. It's amazing just the potential that we all see. Another thing about the checks is, that first check came. I'm going to make up numbers, but let's say it was $10,000, right? You want to celebrate like you just made $10,000 and it just fell out of the sky, but you should have been getting that $1,000 a month at a time. And it's like, it comes in one big fat check and you're like, oh, I just won the lottery. But really, you've been bleeding that money for a while. So it's a weird emotional roller coaster on that. And I have more than one property. So it's not like, I was just suffering for a year and then got a check. So it really, the other properties did compensate for that short term 1 year problem. But man, I remember getting that first check and you're just sitting there like, woohoo. But then you sit back a minute and you'd be like, I mean, this is this is the money I was supposed to be getting all along, right?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, you mentioned that, it made me think about another product that came out over just probably the last year. And it's geared specifically to professionally managed properties, but there's um, insurance company that will basically, if a tenant has been professionally vetted by a professional property management company, doesn't matter who they are, um, that they will pay the entire year's rent in advance to you through the management company. They charge a fee. It's about 10%. So basically, they're basically almost guaranteeing 10% on their money, which is a really good return for these ginormous, hedge fund type folks. Um, but they're guaranteeing like, hey, if your rent was $1,000, they're going to pay you a $12,000 check, and then they're minus whatever their fee is, right, 10%. And then they're going to collect the money from the management company. And I think what was really interesting about it is there's no clawback on it, which I thought was crazy from a business standpoint, but there was no clawback. They're betting on, and they've got data on professional property managers that vet tenants, what that default rate is, and it's really, really small. So anyway, just more products that are out there to kind of safety net, safeguard landlords, to kind of ease some of that fear that you're talking about, Kevin.
Yeah, I've had an interesting week. My wife officiates. She's a pastor, so she did a baptism. She I guess you know she preached at a church that was not her own. So it's like a substitute teacher kind of thing, like substitute preacher. So we were meeting with a family there, and then I was meeting with somebody today, where her and her wife, I spoke with the wife. Her and her husband were divided about what to do with the property. She was all about keeping it as a rental, and he had a lot of emotions about it, from just the idea of renting was really scary to him. So I was talking to her, long term, I really think you should keep it. You should really talk to him into it. So she took some value from that. But it's just interesting, when you do this day in and out, you see so many of the benefits. You see so many people become extraordinarily wealthy, um, and then you kind of you get these blinders, and you become the people you surround yourself with, right? If you're successful and you're surrounded with successful people, start to think like each other, right? So I was exposed to three separate people discussing real estate, and one had two properties. One was talking about what to do with a property they already own, and one was interested in getting involved. And all of them were discussing fears, or you know, nervous situations, and
Mm. What
it was
ifs?
just really, yeah, a lot of what ifs, a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of anxiety around this kind of stuff, but it's also, you know what if you look up one day and you're richer than you could have imagined, and that's what I really tried to show them and talk to them about. And you know, I could have sat on the couch at 37. That's really when the math for me said that I didn't have to work another day, and I just try and share the idea of like if you wake up one day and you're happy, what does that look like? What does it look like to live your best life? If there's plenty of problems in life, but if you can take money out of the problems in your life, it really opens up the door for a lot more happiness and excitement. And I'm married to a pastor, so I'm learning a lot about ways to spend your time and energy to create happiness and good things in life.
So this is a self-promotional plug here, but it's really why I wrote the book about your great escape. And really what this book is about is if you just had one rental property and you just had the other property that you lived in, and you had them both paid off at the end of retirement, 30 years, and nothing special happened, no appreciation, no rent gain, nothing special.
Nothing
like
extra.
like you would basically have over $1 million worth of equity in properties. You would have the cash flow from that. Anyway, kind of lay some of that stuff out in the book, and some of those what if questions that people ask. When you start looking at big portfolios and you start looking at thousands and thousands of properties that have been under management, you can start looking at the averages on this stuff and know that within a certain bandwidth, that's probably where it's going to fall. And you can plan accordingly. But if you don't know, you don't know. So
Yeah, yeah, it's eye-opening and opportunities there. And I heard something recently I really liked, and it's like, you know, uh, investments can be complicated, but man, if you just get a one rental property, it's almost like a forced savings account. Like when you own a house and you're paying a mortgage, it's like you're being forced to put money aside to save. And if 90% of the time it's not coming out of your own pocket, it's coming out of a customer's pocket, a tenant's pocket, you know, it's hard to not look up a couple decades down the road and be like, this was a really good thing. I'm glad we did this.
So Kevin, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the administrative side of real estate investing. And you were sharing a recent story with me about the administrative side, and then I've got a short story to share as well. But I think it's something that gets overlooked when you talk about, oh, you're buying these houses and all of these things, and you got to raise the money, and how'd you find the deal, and all of these different things that come into play. I think the administrative side really gets overlooked when you start talking about this stuff. And maybe we can shed some light on the importance of the administrative side of this.
Well, let me start with something a mentor of mine said. So this guy's been doing real estate, I always say 40 years, but man, I've known him for a hot minute now. So let's say 50 years. He's been doing it a long time. And I remember him telling me when I was brand new years ago, he said for him, the math was at 32 properties. He said, I had a property manager until I hit 32. And then I looked up and did the math one day and it said it was time to hire my own people. And that's that's a lot of properties to get there, right? So I really found that interesting. Before he brought on any staff of his own and did it in house, it made sense to use a property manager. And you see that, right? Like somebody's got to keep the ball rolling. Somebody's got to say, like, if did Joe Blow pay rent? How's this tenant doing? How's that tenant doing? And one of the interesting aspects of the administrative side is, if you have 100 properties, you're probably not going to know more than 5 or 10 of the people, and they're going to be your worst tenants, right? They're going to be the actual people who are not adulting well, if you will, right? They're the ones who are running into some kind of problem, usually financial. Sometimes it's outside their control, is health, but most of the time, you're getting to know your problem tenants, right? Your best tenants, your best occupants, the ones who stay there for years and know how to change their own light bulb. Uh, you might forget their names, right? And somebody has to stay on top of all that. Somebody needs to actually um, have a clue of what's going on a day-to-day basis. And the interesting aspect of living in a world of investors is uh, investors are like poker players and fishermen. They're always chasing the next big thing. They're like, they're a little scatterbrained, right? They get easily excited. But you need somebody who, like a bookkeeper or your accountant, has the personality to make sure all the ducks are in a row. And if you're excited about real estate, there's a good chance that that's not you.
That is so true. So many people I've met over the years have a similar personality when it comes to real estate investing, and it's a little bit of that entrepreneurial minded. Like you said, the bigger fish, the shiny object, and they're really good at being rainmakers, chasing down deals and analyzing properties, acquiring properties. But when it comes to the organizational side of things, a lot of times that's where folks struggle. I can't tell you, just over the years, Kevin, how many people, landlords, have come to me and they said, I got to get this tenant out of my property. They haven't been paying. I'm saying, okay, well, you know, how many months are they behind? I don't know, 9 or 10. And I'm like, 9 or 10. I'm like, oh my gosh, like they should have been out, 45 days after the first time they missed the payment, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, well, do you have any documentation of, how they were paying? And there's nothing. And
I
it's
would
like,
knock on the door
wow.
and they'd hand me $50. I don't know.
Right. And and I look at that and I'm like, oh man, I'm like, this is just another one of those scenarios where, the landlord was, they were their own worst enemy and they didn't realize it. They were what do you call that? Pound wise, penny foolish, I don't know, something like that. There's an acronym that goes along with that. But so yeah, the administrative side is really important. And I'll say from my standpoint, the properties that I buy, there's always something that on the administrative side that has to be chased down, has to be mailed, that has to be rerouted to another address, maybe not my personal home address, because heaven forbid I get I'll get the HOA bill that comes to my personal home address. Like I might not open it for a week. Whereas like that needs to get opened, it needs to get scanned in, it needs to be logged against a ledger as an expense on that property, it needs to get paid. Like all of those things have got to happen. Um, and if you're not really organized about it, things can get missed.
So you talk about that organization stuff. I have a friend um, who's a long-term investor, and he is the epitome of not organized, right? But it's not just that things fall off his plate, and he notices that needs to be taken care of a year later, right? It's also things like he's an investor, he's a businessman, right? But as an example, years ago, I remember he had a property and he got quoted 2 grand to paint it. He's like, 2 grand? I'll go paint it myself. So he has the skills to go paint it himself. So he goes and paints it himself, but he's busy. He's got a lot of stuff going on, right? So the property sits for 2 months while he's waiting to go paint it himself. Like he's just got to find the time. So what happens is time is money, right? That's 2 months of nothing. And between borrowing costs, between not having money come in, you're losing money. And that's a problem for people like us. If we're not organized, if we're not on top of things, it's just, things pile up because we're like, I'll take care of it myself. I'll take care of it myself. And it sits on the back burner and you look up one day and you're like, man, I do not want to do the math on how much I lost because of time, right? Because of disorganization, because of, I could paint it for $1,000 if I do it myself, but we're going to wait 2 months before I have the time. That's just not the
Yeah.
way you want to do it.
I think a lot of times though, as entrepreneurs, we really don't understand, maybe where our true value is at. So our true value if you're a real estate investor, your value is negotiating that next deal, finding that next deal. Like you're wasting your time if painting the house kind of thing. Whereas if you took that same time that you were going to paint the house and just focus that in on finding another deal or negotiating another deal or financing another deal, like your your time value of money goes up significantly. So it's really cool. And one of the things I was going to say about this administrative side, Kevin, is several of my rental properties are in condo associations. So it's just another layer of complexity. And, for whatever reason, the tenants are always getting violations because, they didn't have the right blinds up in the windows. They left the trash outside of the door. They parked in the wrong spot. And if I didn't do the administrative work of making sure that those violations came through to the property management company so that they could address them. I end up getting a lot of these condo associations have daily charges that start to rack up. It'll be like $10 a day because you didn't take care of the violation. $10 a day, $10 a day until it's taken care of. And I've ran into that situation personally where, basically the mail was not going to the correct place. And I didn't even know about the violations. Tenant probably knew, but they're not saying anything about it. So it racks up these hundreds of dollars of bills and violations, just because the mail wasn't going to the correct place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of those things where you do want to read the fine print on your HOA. I personally had a property that had the $10 a day thing, but I found out that there's a cap, right? I think that HOA, it couldn't go over $1,000, right? So if they get too irritated, you're almost like, you know what? I'm never selling that house. Put a lien against the property for $1,000. I hate you guys. You're driving me nuts, right? But yeah, that's definitely one of those things that you do want to stay on top of because and man, those organizations, they're so small and it's easy to get, somebody who's got a bad attitude, and you just need to stay on top of that stuff. One, you stay off those people's radar, and two, you avoid any of the animosity that crops up. It's amazing, being organized and having somebody on top of all this stuff. It's amazing how many landmines you avoid. Like you don't even realize you're avoiding landmines when you're organized. And man, I've seen a number of examples. I knew a business guy. We'll call him an acquaintance. I'm not really that close with him, but he had he had a property that was you know it should have been generating $25,000 a month, but it was on his back burner. He had like 10 projects that were more important than this building, and it's just sitting over here losing $25,000 a month. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a problem, but it's not my biggest problem. I got to stay on top of these other things. And just like, man, but he didn't have like the emotional I don't know, what do you want to call it, but he couldn't let go of the property to let somebody professionally manage it for him, right? Like he had to micromanage it. And I've seen a couple of people do that. You're doing millions of dollars, but you can't not micromanage. And it's just interesting to see how much bleeding of dollars happens because they can't trust somebody else to do that disciplined, organized aspect for them. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it quite often on my side of things. And let's again shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk about what we're seeing in the real estate market from an investment standpoint. What what maybe we're thinking about, as far as like what are these higher interest rates going to do? Are we still seeing deals out there? What are you seeing in the market right now, Kevin?
All right. Well, my focus might be slightly different than I was talking to an agent earlier today, and it's interesting sometimes to realize even that your vocabulary is different, right? The agent has a different lingo than an investor does, right? What I feel is really important is I don't think rents are going down, right? We're seeing inflation. The wages are going. There's way more jobs available than employees. You're seeing all these components in our society that says uh, you have to pay people more, and their hourly wages are going to go up. So to me, that's really important because one of the most aspects from my perspective on real estate is what can a normal family, with 2.5 kids and 1.5 dogs, what can that family afford, right? Um, so to me, I'm seeing rents go up, and I don't believe that they're going to go down, right? And that's really important. I'm basing a lot of rental long-term decisions on what can a family afford on a monthly basis. And as long as I'm confident and feel that that number is going to stay where it's at or go up, I can make a lot of good decisions for my future. What I am not as sure about, and I'm seeing some different warning signs on it, especially in markets like big markets like California. Like in 2007, when the market crashed, there was 6 or 7 big spots: California, Florida, Vegas, Atlanta. You're seeing these big spots that had the big swings and then big swings down, right? So you kind of pay attention to those same spots the second go around. And what you see is as rates go up, there's a clear indication that certain people are being like, oh, that monthly payment's too much. I was looking for a house in California, but now I think I got to stay where I'm at, or not buy a new house. And you're seeing like inventory is still at a shortage, but you're seeing it rise. There's a bidding frenzy, but now there's slightly less bids. You're seeing so you're like, all right, what does that look like long term when it hits the rest of the world as these rates go up, right? So you know a change from 4% to 5% on a loan may deter somebody from moving in California, but it might not do it in Indianapolis or another state, right? But eventually you're going to be like, instead of an extra 30-40 bucks, you're going to be like, you know what, no thank you, I'm going to stay where I'm at, or I'm going to change my decision, right? So you're seeing all these indicators like prices going up. Are they just going to stabilize and stay where they are as rates go up? And then it's compensated by inflation. You're seeing there's still a significant shortage of inventory. There's a lot of factors at play. But to me, the one I'm really confident on and really feeling strongly about is what the normal family can afford. And if I can get a family into a spot, and I feel that that rent will still be something that doesn't change or doesn't go down for the next year or two, I feel good about that. The rest of it is a big old question mark in my head with varying indicators I'm watching.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Kevin. I think, one of the things I think back just to my childhood, and I think, um, what kind of blue collar, working class family housing was, you know, 30 years ago. Um, I still drive through those neighborhoods, and they are still blue collar, working class family homes. However, the value of those homes are double, sometimes 3 times, more expensive, um, price wise than they were when I was growing up. But still same folks, live in those properties, and I would venture to say that it's very similar like that, across the United States, and it just points to this. Kind of this measure to look at a market, and that's the value to earnings ratio. So you start to look at, well, what's the median income, right? So your family kind of dynamic versus what's the median home price in that market. And what's that ratio between the two? Is it like, so Indianapolis as an example, that ratio is a 4. Um, so that's pretty low. That means that, basically if somebody is, if the median income in that market was $25,000 a year salary, that the median house would only be $100,000 house, right? Versus you go to a market like a San Francisco in California, well, that metric is somewhere between 16 and 18, which is bananas. It's almost like unbelievable. So you start looking for these markets where ultimately at the end of the day, people are buying houses on the payment, right? So that has a big impact. But on our side as investors, you're seeing rents go up, but what you're also seeing go up, at least in the states that we're working in, is minimum wage is going up. So it goes back to basically what are the earnings that family unit can afford to pay. And that's a big driving force in the housing market. And sometimes there's a lag. I'm seeing it right now in one of our markets where you're seeing like you would typically call them like the lower income housing areas, where the properties are going up on the market for $150,000, and they're not exactly being snapped up left and right. Like, people aren't buying them left and right because they're in those lower income kind of war zone-ish type places. But the rents that can be commanded in those same properties are significantly higher than they were, again, just 6-9 months ago. And so long as a family unit's base wages go up because minimum wage goes up, it's going to stabilize even those lower income areas from a housing perspective. So I see it as a good thing. And I see some people maybe missing, kind of that dynamic or that opportunity because maybe they're looking at like, hey, those low income areas, at one point that was, I could buy that house for 70,000 and now they want 150, so you're price anchoring to old data possibly.
I also remember the first time this really jumped out at me was when I went to Dallas, Texas. And I'm looking at houses where in my neighborhood at the time, now they'd be an extra $100,000. But in my neighborhood, I'm like, these are $200,000 houses. And they're like, well, these are $80,000 houses. These are $100,000 houses. This one's a $120,000 house. And it was mind boggling to me to see, we're still in the US, in general, people are paid the same amount. Why are these such different valuations? And it came back to what can people afford on a monthly basis. So I found out that the taxes were drastically higher in that area than what I'm used to, right? So if Joe Blow can afford $1,000 a month towards housing, and a big chunk of it goes towards taxes, it only leaves so much for a mortgage, right? So all the prices reflect the mortgage that Joe Blow can afford. And it really stood out to me after that all of it's based on what they can afford on a monthly basis. So as interest rates change, you're going to see the payments are, you know, unless everybody gets a 20% raise, as we see 20% inflation, the payment is what the family in that area can afford. As interest rates go up, you're going to see prices drop, or people need raises to be able to afford the new payment, right? But as interest rates change, you're like, can things keep going up, or are they going to stabilize, or are they going to go down? Well, I feel like a big part of that depends on you know what can a family afford every month, and the rest of it fluctuates around that key pivot point, if you will.
Yeah, I would say that, it's interesting because as interest rates go up, obviously it makes the payment go up. But the one thing that you saw it a little bit in California over the last decade, and that is most people look at their mortgage as a 30-year fixed mortgage or some type of 30-year, maybe 15, maybe a 10-year, whatever it is, right? But there's a term. In California, there are 40-year mortgages. right? So extending out that term, even with a higher interest rate, lowered that payment down so somebody could afford it. And in turn, what happens when you do that is it allows the value of the properties to either stabilize and not come down, or it allows them to go up. So, I wonder, one of the big shifts in that, like if we were to say, hey, everybody's going to go to a 40-year mortgage so they can afford this stuff and we don't have a crash in the housing market and so on and so forth, the one catalyst would be that, basically Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac would have to buy those. So those mortgage-backed securities at a 40-year would have to be bought essentially by the government. I don't see that happening, but that is one of the mechanisms. That one of these Federal Reserve chairman board members, they've mentioned that in their talks, is basically, kind of what about a 40-year mortgage? But it would take the government buying those mortgage-backed securities for that to take place.
It's I remember in 2006, 2007 hearing about in California, there was a 100-year mortgage being thrown around for a little bit, right? Clearly not a majority of the loans, but you know, this the next best thing to an interest only mortgage, right? Where if time continues as it is, where the valuations of the house changes, inflation happens, and so forth, then you're keeping the smallest possible payment. Um, you know, I'm not excited about it. I want to pay these things off like they're really big credit cards, but you know, and you're also thinking, like, if they start buying 40-year mortgages, like that's an industry changing thing, because it's either you play along and get a 40-year mortgage, or your math is now harder than everybody else's math, right? I don't know. There's all gives and takes, right? So
Definitely something to think about, guys. Hope you got something great out of this episode. If you like it, give us a thumbs up. If you're going to want to join us, stay with us, subscribe to the channel, and we look forward to having you on for the next one. Leave a comment below. What do you think about 40-year mortgages and anything else we've talked about today? Take care, guys.